Hello, everyone. Is it 2:08? No, missed it by 3 minutes. So it's 2:11. It's time for our live stream. And this week we're going to talk about what happened a week ago. I gave you guys a couple of videos. I left town. I came back. I dealt with more issues. And the whole week's just been unfolding, working on the reef tank behind me to make it pretty and to keep it healthy and happy. So I wanted to kind of go into some of your questions, and I want to try to address some potential ideas. And I wanted to get your feedback. Obviously, I like to hear what you're thinking as well, because it helps me, especially when you're in the middle of a problem and everything's coming unglued. Sometimes it's really hard to think your own way through it, and so it's best to talk to others. So I'm going to talk about that here in a moment. Hello, everybody. I see quite a few names popping up in here already. Let's see, who was our first person today? Abel Plant was the first one in. Hi, Jamie. Hello, Providence and Neil. Aquatic Aura. All right, so if you haven't seen the videos yet, last Saturday I released a short 7-minute video talking about what happened on Friday. And then on Sunday I released a 5-minute video that kind of gave you kind of an update of where things were the next day, to kind of show you where things were. I'm basically going to say that I did not have a crash. So my record is still 0 when it comes to crashes, which is great. I definitely had a scary moment in the tank where a big colony was just going up in smoke, and it touched a lot of other colonies. So its potential to spread spot to spot to spot is super dangerous. And when it was happening, I didn't understand it. I mean, I just woke up and started my day like any other day. And this coral was just imploding. And by imploding, it was RTNing, which is rapid tissue necrosis. And when they say rapid, it's because it's really, really fast. There's also slow tissue necrosis, which is something that just happens from the bottom of corals up, and it takes weeks. It could be here, it could be there. It's a totally different thing. RTN is like your coral is dying, it's going to be dead in a matter of hours. And it's not brown jelly disease. I mean, it's its own thing. You can Google RTN. So I've done a couple of blogs on it in the past where I had a single coral go up in smoke, and it was always some weird arbitrary thing that I couldn't identify what caused it. And to be honest, at this point, I still, I'm going to say the jury is out on what happened in my tank. I don't know. But I've got a few theories, and I'm going to share them with you, and I can see what you think as well. And if you don't know anything about this, maybe you'll learn something from it, and it'll benefit you with your own tank one day if something similar were to arise, so you kind of know how to react. So let me rewind and tell you what actually happened. So I told you I woke up and I'm looking in the middle of my reef, and the water's a little bit opaque, or a little bit, just a hint of milkiness. And I thought, well, that's weird. I wonder what's going on. And so as I looked at the spot right here behind me, this big colony had a spot of white about this big around, or maybe wider, and you could just see that it was spreading outward. And I waited for the lights to come on to really get a good look, because under blue light, you're not going to see anything. And after I gave it some time and I'm looking at it, I'm like, no, this is bad. And it's in a terrible spot. It's not like I can trim something off. It was the epicenter of a colony, and you really can't just go in there and, like a laser, just cut it out in a circle and pop it out like the center of a donut, which would have been super convenient, but not an option. I started calling friends. I called the fish store by me as well to see if he had certain things in stock, because I felt like I had a big project ahead of me. I wanted to hear his feedback. I called my buddy Ryan, who has a 1,000-gallon SPS reef. I reached out to Dwayne, who's in Seattle. I reached out to Aaron down in Austin. Who else did I talk to? I know I'm leaving names out, but I talked to quite a few people as I tried to come up with a working plan that would not destroy the tank at the same time. Basically, I don't want to overreact. I want to do enough work to fix what's wrong, but not go overboard. And like I said, I don't know what caused it. So let's just pretend. Let's pretend it was my nitrates. My nitrates have been up for a long time. My corals are used to it. And I'd say a couple of years ago, I talked about doing some massive water changes, just bring the darn number down and be done with it. And I had people that sell salt for a living, like Sean from Fritz said, "Are you sure you want to do that?" And I was like, "Yeah, why?" And he said, "Your corals are beautiful, and you're just going to just do these massive water changes to bring down this number that bothers you?" And I was like, "Yeah." And that made me doubt should I do it? And like I said, he sells salt for a living, and he was basically saying, why would you make this choice? So I kind of decided maybe I shouldn't do this. Maybe the big water changes would really affect the corals adversely because they are so used to nitrate. But let's just pretend nitrate is what caused this problem in my tank. And you know, my numbers have been very high. Somewhere reading around 80 ppm for the last 6 months. And it was only the previous live stream, so what, 2 weeks ago, where it dawned on me, or I told you guys, I realized my protein skimmer, while it's always on, was not really pulling out any liquid for a long time. And I never really thought of it. I just knew that it wasn't full and needed to be cleaned, but I didn't correlate it as, hey, it hasn't pulled out anything in a long time. I was just glad I wasn't dealing with a mess. And so I thought, oh, my mistake. So I made some adjustments to the skimmer to make it export a little bit more liquid, which, I mean, all we pulled out after that live stream to the RTN event was about maybe 3 gallons of water out of the tank. So I wouldn't say that happened, that pulling out some dirty water suddenly hurt the tank. But I did want to say, what if nitrates are 80 and the corals are still hanging in there, and then nitrates hit 81, and the first coral says, that's it, I'm out of here, and commits suicide, and says, I'm taking everyone with me. Maybe that was it. I don't know. I hadn't done anything in the tank specifically, like I hadn't dosed anything, I hadn't removed anything, I hadn't disturbed anything, I hadn't done any changes. So for this to happen all of a sudden on a Friday morning didn't make any sense to me at all. And at the same time, I really didn't care about the cause at that moment as much as how do I handle what's going on in the tank right now. Another theory, and this was actually a YouTube comment, someone said, could it be your turf scrubber? Is it releasing some kind of toxic stuff? Like, for example, if there was a power outage and then the power came back on, the stuff that had decayed and died, once you turned on the flow again, or the flow restored, it just sent all that toxicity into your tank. And normally I would just say, no, absolutely not a chance. But because I didn't know what had happened, I wasn't ruling anything out, and I contacted Jason, and the person that made my turf scrubber, and I said, I'm just going to throw this out there. Is there any possibility that you would think this is that this could have happened based on the weird crap that my turf scrubber's been pulling out instead of just pulling out nice clean hair algae? And I said, and you know what? I'm totally fine with you saying absolutely not, Mark. There's no way. That's fine too. Just give me your feedback. I'm just looking for an honest opinion. And he felt like it wasn't possible that the turf scrubber had done that. So in the meantime, I'm looking in the turf scrubber, and well, I'm jumping ahead a little bit. So I dealt with what was going. Okay, I don't want to keep going. I don't want to jump ahead. I'm sorry. I want to stay on what other what ifs. Could salinity have been too high? No, 1.028 in my tank is not too high. It's a little high, but it's not enough to cause corals to go up in smoke. If anything, 1.028 affects zoanthids and makes them close up, and mine were wide open. So it wasn't enough of a tipping point to cause problems. Then, trying to think what else. No, that's it. Those are basically my 3 things. Could it have been the turf scrubber, which is a weird thing to blame? Could it have been nitrates just got so high it finally pushed them over the edge? Could it have been something I dosed? No, because I didn't. And then one theory that Dwayne suggests is maybe your tank spawned overnight, and during the spawning, it caused some chaos, which caused some coral warfare. Which, that part is what was going on in the tank. I was seeing coral warfare. I was seeing a big bad spot between a chalice, a montipora, and that acropora. And it was just, like I said, a wildfire spreading out, just burning outward. It's the best way to describe it, as it migrated into more and more healthy tissue, destroying it. So I don't know that the chalice did it. It was the epicenter. I mean, it literally was bad. But you know what? Normally when a coral is killing another coral, the other one dies, and the one that attacked looks great. It's like, oh, got a great meal. Thanks very much for giving me that delicious snack. So this chalice, I lost half of it to what looked like a cocoon of, I guess, bacteria that was coating it. And so I'm looking at that. I'm watching the sunset's almost gone. The Drew's acro is dying badly, and stuff's blowing through the water column. And that's where my big concern was, the movement of water. And when I asked Drew, I said, what do you think? He said, well, I wouldn't turn off your return pump. And my inclination was turn off the return pump. Stop moving water across the reef, because here's the death, and the water is shooting across it. I felt it would blow the death onto the Milka, onto the Acros, onto the the blue tort, onto Pasillipora, I mean, onto everything else. And I just felt like I don't want this stuff here to hit over here and just start melting everything it touches. So that was when it occurred to me our return pump is an Abyss pump, which is a DC powered pump, and it is variable speed. And so I was able to actually reduce the flow in the tank, or the return pump was coming up at a much slower rate. I think I brought it down to like 50%. And, he had one of my friends, it might have been Drew, might have been the next person I was on the phone with, because I actually dealt with this through phone calls for a couple of hours or so before I did anything. But he was saying, put your pump at 25% then. And when I did, no water was coming out. And I would assume that was because the plumbing and the restrictions and the flow accelerators and elbows and all that kind of stuff puts enough resistance that 25% is still zero on my tank. So I bumped it up to 40 and put my hand on the nozzle and felt almost nothing. So I put up to 50% and left the tank alone because I had to go work. I had to run across town before they closed and pick up all the packing materials that I used to pack orders because it was ready. And so I had to just walk away from the tank. So here is this mess happening in my reef. I've slowed the flow. I've called a bunch of friends for advice, and then I left. And I came back an hour and a half later. I packed some more orders. And it was really hot here. I mean, it was probably somewhere close to 100 degrees, and the feels like it was more like 108, 110. And to do a big water change was going to require me to open the door to pump water out. And I just didn't want to let all that hot air into the house as I'm dealing with pumping water out. So I was kind of holding off a little bit longer in the day until I could open the door and handle it a little more comfortably. And, had the time and the ability and the chance to focus. In the meantime, I was also making sure that my saltwater vat that was behind the tank was mixed up to the proper salinity to match the tank. So I want to emphasize that again. I've told this to you guys many times, and I repeat it because there's always someone new on here, and some of you maybe aren't listening anyway. So listen up. When you're making saltwater for your tank, you want to match your salinity, your temperature, and your pH. And so when I say pH, I mean that's the easiest test, obviously. You can measure the tank, you can measure the saltwater, you can compare. But basically what I do is I buffer up the alkalinity. So for me, I'm really measuring temperature, salinity, and alkalinity. But alkaline and pH, they work together. So if the alkalinity matches on both, the pH is going to match on both. So I would emphasize that if you're not doing that before your water changes now, if you're just getting jugs of water from the fish store and you're just put it by the tank and then you just pour it in, you're not doing any comparisons, that's really risky, and I don't recommend it. So please do check the water you're about to put in your tank, make sure they match, or make any adjustments necessary, even if it's kind of a pain to get it right. And that's what I did. So that afternoon, I packed the orders, I got them to FedEx and to the post office, and then I went back to my vat and I measured everything, and my temperature was on point, my salinity was exactly the same, alkalinity was matching, and now it's time to pump out 200 gallons of water. Actually, I had 260 gallons of water available, and I was thinking, I don't know how much 260 is on this tank because I never do a water change that large. Usually when I would do a water change, which is rare, I would pump water out of the skimmer section in the return zone, which is probably somewhere around 65, 70 gallons of water. And here I'm actually taking water out of the display tank, which I never do, and I'm just draining it down and trying to guesstimate how much water that's going to be. I'm measuring it with a tape measure, and I'm like, okay, from here to here is 12 inches. 12 inches times, I think it was 82.5 inches by 34.5 inches, because the glass is all 3/4 inch, times the height, and that gives me this much water. I'm like, okay, and then I'm taking out this much out of the sump. I'm trying to figure it all out. But after I had sucked out about 12, 13 inches of water out of my tank, I said, that's it. And I started pumping water back into the tank immediately, even though the sump was still pumping water out. Because the display tank was down to here at this point, and I could go ahead and start pushing water in because it can't drain. It's just going to replenish and get these corals that are exposed to air. And these, whatever was in the tank, I had to get it submerged underwater again. So everything in the tank was exposed, the top section, for about 15 minutes as I pumped more water back in using a longer hose on the poly tank. and I pointed it directly at a hard piece of plumbing so it wouldn't just hit the sand bed and it wouldn't hit a coral. I wanted to send the flow coming out of the hose into something solid to disperse it so it would trickle into the tank instead of blast something that I didn't want to hit. And still, my tank got really milky. I mean, it was like I'd done a kalkwasser overdose. And I thought, man, that's weird. Where did that come from? Because when I measured my salinity, I poured the water into a big graduated thing, and it was clear. So, and when I'm pumping the water in, I mean, it's coming out of a hose, but it looked clear to me. But the more I put in, the milkier the tank got. I thought, man, is that from all the work I did in the middle of the tank? Is that, what's happened here? Is it the death and decay that I dropped in the tank as I was removing? I wasn't sure, but the water did clear up in a matter of hours. And the interesting thing to me, and I realize fish are different from corals, but the fish were absolutely unaffected. I watched the copper band just hunting. And there was like 6 to maybe 12 inches of visibility, and the copper band would just appear and start looking for worms in the sand bed and just keep swimming. I watched Spock. She's swimming by normally. I mean, she's not happy, but her gills weren't doing anything weird. There was no strange stress response. There was no erratic swimming and darting about. They were more like, what did you do? And they just swam around. I'm like, all right. And then as the water got more and more clear, I'm looking at the yellow tangs now. I'm looking at the purple tang. I'm looking at the clownfish. And like I said, the fish just didn't seem to mind at all because temperature, salinity, and alkalinity matched. That's why it's so important that your two waters match so closely. Now, what about the removal of the coral, which was in that video last week? So it was really hard to cut that out. And here it is. At this point in the day, it's like I said, 6:30 in the evening. As I'm reaching in and I'm cutting with bone cutters, I'm not really making any progress. I mean, I'm cutting through it. I hear it snapping, but the entire thing was just like this mass. It kind of reminded me of what it was like when Dwayne was here. Everything had grown into everything, and everything was attached to everything, and the rock work and the corals, they were one. So I'm trying to find points where I can break it free and extract the dead coral, because the advice that I think it was Ryan gave me says, I would recommend you put a tray on top of the tank, some kind of a plastic bin, and lift that coral with all its depth and put it right on the tray, and don't let any of that drip back into your tank. You don't want any of it to spread. And that's kind of why, that was exactly why I was thinking I need to turn the return pump down to stop it from moving across. And that is what prevented my RTN from jumping from colony to colony, even though they touched each other. The Milka was literally touching the Drew's acro. The blue tort was right under it. I mean, the chalice was doing its thing. I mean, everything was happening. The shadowcaster was on the other side getting hit. There was all this going on, but by stopping the return pump to a much weaker flow, I was able to keep it isolated. The vortex still kept the water moving in the tank, but the coral itself still had the death on it, and it had moved way out. There's about this much left on the edges, and I didn't even care. It was beautiful looking, healthy coral, but I knew it wouldn't survive. So there's no point trying to trim off the outer 2 inches and save those pieces, because they were gonna go. When this is happening, there's really such a slim chance that it will survive that it's just best to remove it all. And it helps if you have more of that coral somewhere in the tank, which I did. So I wasn't freaking out that, oh, this is the end of the Drew's acro, because I had this big colony in there, and underneath I had a second tier, and the tier was healthy and it was below all this disaster. So I did finally cut out the big Drew's acro. And this is what it looks like. So, bigger than my head. This, I don't know what it weighs. Obviously it was heavier when it was wet. It's been sitting on the back porch, but I didn't put in this, it's not like been baking in the sun to turn it white or anything like that. So it's a lot of weird coloration in there. The outer edges where it's dark was the part that was still alive when I took it out of the tank. The inner part here was where all the death was happening that you saw in the video. And it's funny, when I pulled this out of the tray today to bring it inside so that I could show it to you guys and give you a sense of scale, I was smelling it, and a lot of people are like, oh, the smell of acros is terrible. It's not. It just smells like coral skeleton. And the thing is, it brings me all the way back to when I was 11 years old. And my dad would bring home corals from Tahiti to put in his aquarium. And, he would just take the coral out, and he would, out of the ocean, put it in a suitcase. and then he'd fly home and he'd boil it and they'd put it in the sun and he'd bleach it and then he'd put this white thing in his aquarium, and it smelled just like the coral back then. I mean, there was no grossness to it. It was kind of funny to have that memory pop in my head as I was smelling this coral. It was childhood. So how weird is that? But yeah, so this is a big loss. And then, I still had some more death happening in the tank elsewhere. And I did what I could. I removed some stuff. It wasn't widespread. Like I said, it was really localized. And there was like the tip of one colony would turn white. And there was another one over here with a little speck of white. And there was a spot over here. But it wasn't systematic. And so I'm thinking the ones that were in these weird locations, some of this had blown off and touched those or landed on them or wrapped on them and got enough of its toxicity on there that it did this damage. But in the meantime, I've been taking things out of the tank, and as I was taking them out, I was kind of laughing to myself. So many of you love to buy a frag. And you'll go to the store and you'll say, oh my God, I love that acro, I want it. And it's about this big. It's a little tiny thing on a frag plug. And this was just the tip of something I trimmed off. And then, the reason I was laughing to myself was like, but I also took out one that was about this big. And I took one out that was this big. And I took one out that was this big. These are some large corals, if this was a frag that was given to you, you'd be like, oh my God, I want that. It's so nice. And these were things that just grew from nothing, that started with a little bit of DNA in my tank. And so there's all these scraps here. I'm going to throw it all away. But I just was wanting to kind of give you a sense of scale of what was lost. So now let me show you how the tank looks. I have a video I stuck on my phone. I didn't actually upload it. So we're going to play it directly from the phone if I do everything right here. Let's see. So this is right before the stream. I just set up the camera and went about my business. So how do I do this? There we go. And so now you're seeing the reef, what it looks like today. And like I said, you can't even, with a webcam, you can't even tell what the tank looks like behind me. It just looks like the camera doesn't focus on me and on the tank. And, no matter what lighting I put on the tank, it never looks right. So I just filmed it with the iPhone to give you a heads-on view of the tank. Only one of the metal halides was on at the point when I started filming. You can see in the dead center near Spock's tail, that's the shadow caster. And there's a little bit of death at the top. And there's a big green section. The green section is completely dead too. That went up in the last, during the week it started dying. But what was kind of ironic to me was that section alone was the part that I put back in my tank when Dwayne had trimmed out so many corals out of my reef tank almost 3 years ago. And I had that big chunk and he was like, no, you don't want that in your tank. I was like, yes, I do. And he said, no, get rid of it. No, it's evil. I said, no, I want this coral in my tank. There's not enough. You took out too much. I need this. And that chunky piece is what grew all of the shadow caster. At this point now, my shadow caster is, a third of what it was, from the RTN event. But there's still quite a bit alive, and, we'll see what happens here in the coming days. The biggest goal of mine was to keep everything alive as much as possible and just deal with the absolute worst case scenario, and then of course make sure the gear is working properly. So what else did I do? All right, I'm just going to leave this playing. Maybe I'll stick myself here in a picture-in-picture somehow. Try this. What's this do? I never know what I'm doing here. Let's try this. Nope. I don't remember how. I can't even find it. Oh, there we go. Try to turn that on. Maybe it's not going to do it because I'm showing it to you straight from my phone. Anyway, I'll just talk to you while this is playing because we've got, something like 20 minutes of video here. So during this week, I didn't do much except observe the tank and keep things clean. I did go ahead and, of course, test the water on Sunday when I was back home, and parameters were decent. The nitrates were down a little bit. and then I made another batch of salt water, another 260 gallons of salt water. When I did that, I had to buy a new barrel of salt, which I mentioned on Instagram and Facebook. Maybe you saw the post. And that salt is aqua vitro. I've been using it for years. And so I picked up another barrel. A barrel makes 1,026 gallons of water. That salt water, roughly, I mean, I don't know. I think it's somewhere around 80 pounds of, well, no, what is it? I know I put in something around 64 or 65 gallons of salt in the barrel when I was mixing, but that's not the exact amount because there was already a little bit of salt water left over. So I was buffering it, whatever, bringing the salinity back up to the right level. But basically, to fill that vat up, it's cost me about $80 in salt per time I do it. So I was like, wow, water changes aren't as cheap as someone might think, you know? But then last night, I made sure that the salinity in my reef tank and the salinity of the barrel matched. And that's another story I got to share with you here in a second, but I'm going to skip ahead. I also made sure the temperatures were the same, which both the tank and the barrel were somewhere close to 80 degrees according to a glass thermometer. So I took that same thermometer and put it in both. I didn't read a thermometer on the tank and then grab a different thermometer and stick it in the barrel. I want to use the same thermometer to measure both items because that way they correlate. And once I knew that the temperature was the same, I didn't worry about that anymore. Salinity was the same, so I didn't worry about that. I checked my alkalinity, and the barrel of salt water was at 8 DKH. My reef was at 10.5 DKH. So I went ahead and I buffered it up with some baked baking soda. I used the Reef chemistry calculator to determine how much I needed. It said 9 teaspoons, which I mixed in a large container of water and poured that into the barrel, and I let it mix for about 20 minutes. And now my barrel was ready because alkalinity, temperature, and salinity matched. I turned off the return pump, the protein skimmer, all the alarms and alerts, the top off, everything was disabled. And I pumped out about 220 gallons of water out of the tank and sump and refilled it with brand new water. And this time it wasn't as milky as last Friday when I was done. Again, I don't know why it was so milky, but it doesn't matter. It was a little cloudy, but not as bad. The fish were upset that I was so focused on doing this water change that they didn't get fed. But that's okay. I'd rather just focus on making sure the water was good. And so here's the next point I want to talk about is that, like I said earlier, one person said, are you sure you want to change that much water in your tank? Aren't you going to shock your corals? But I had to do something major last Friday because the corals were dying. And with that big coral dying, it was a lot of death in one decaying mass. That was enough to really be toxic to the entire system. And left unchecked, it would have been a cascading domino effect throughout the tank. So I had chosen at that point, remove as much of it as I could, do a massive water change to dilute the problem down as much as I could, and then hope for the best. Because I literally did everything within my power. Another thing that I did this week was I took out the drawer of the turf scrubber and I cleaned out all the stuff that really concerned me in the bottom of the drawer. It was just like red and yellow and gooey. I mean, it just didn't look right. I don't know if it was cyano. I don't know what it was, but I just felt like it doesn't belong in my tank whatsoever. And I didn't want the water running down the sheet in the turf scrubber and hitting that and flowing across that and draining into my sump and pumping into the tank. I just felt like it's one more potential candidate to be a problem. So I cleaned it all out really well. I scraped the screen clean of what was on there, which was, there's algae on there, but there was all this other crud. It was just nasty. And I don't do anything more than just scrape it and hang it back in there. But this time I was in the sink looking at it closely, and I kind of took the screen and I swatted it against the edge of the sink, and like all this weird stuff came out of the holes. It wasn't detritus. It wasn't algae. It was like this beige stuff. It might have been bacteria of some kind. I don't know what it was. But it kind of fell out, and I thought, all right. And I just put the screen back in, and I hooked it up. And I knew once I start the flow across it, there's a good chance it's just going to rinse everything off that sheet, and I'm going to have an empty sheet. There's just going to be nothing on it. And I was too aggressive in cleaning it, maybe. And I thought, oh, well, there's a mesh sock under there. It's catching whatever comes out. That is what it is. And the the next day or 2 days later, I open the drawer and I look, and the entire sheet is almost white. I'm like, wow. I mean, it's like I'm starting from scratch again. But I thought, oh well, and I just closed the drawer. I knew that I didn't have anything bad in there. I just didn't have what I was wanting. And I waited another couple of days and opened the drawer, and there was green hair algae growing on it, and that's all that was growing on it. No other weird surprises. So I'm kind of happy about that. And then I trimmed out some dead corals 2 nights ago, just little sticks here and there that had not made it. And as I'm working in the tank and I'm working around the toadstool leather that you can't see in this video, normally you see it right behind the anemone, but the toadstool leather during my water change kind of fell over. And I tried to prop it up, and while I was dealing with it, I found a huge hole in the middle of it. And it's not what you would expect, like if a leather was trying to frag itself. Normally when they frag themselves, they kind of tear. You know, a piece tears off because of the weight. There's a huge hole. Like, it had an abscess, and now whatever's in there is gone. So did the toadstool leather have to do with this thing? I don't know. To be honest, I may never know what happened to my tank a week ago, but I can tell you after doing 2 monster water changes and then one other thing, today the nitrates are measuring somewhere around 20 to 30 ppm. Yay! So that's pretty cool. I'm going to hit pause in there. I mean, that's pretty much most of the video. Yeah, the nitrates are way lower in the tank. Now, I want to talk about one more thing that I did, and this was, again, like I said, I don't just assume I know everything, because I don't. And I like to talk to others and get their feedback. And some of the moderators in Club Mila's Reef, let me throw that on the screen. Some of the moderators in Club Mila's Reef are really, really smart. And so when there's a math question, I ask them. And I said, look, here's the salinity of my tank right now, which was 1.028. I want my tank to be 1.026. My saltwater vat was 1.024. And so I said, you know, in theory, I could put in the lower salinity in the tank, pump out so much water that it should equalize and coming out to 1.026. And they crunched the numbers and they said, yep, this calculator says exactly what you thought, and it puts you at 1.0262. And I said, well, that's great, but I don't like the idea of pumping in lower salinity water all of a sudden and waiting for the tank to mix it up and equalize to get me where I need to be. So I don't want to have 1.028 and 1.024 come together and eventually in 30 minutes or so we're finally at 1.026. And they agreed. They said, yeah, that's not really great. And that's kind of how I felt. So I said, how about if I get the salinity in the barrel up to 1.026? And how about if I get the salinity in the tank down to 1.026? Then I can do my big water change Friday night, and it'll be like nothing really happened. And they agreed. And so I said, well, is there some kind of a calculator that tells me how much salt water to take out and how much RODI water I have to put in to get the salinity down where I need to be? And they said, yeah, absolutely. And they pulled up another calculator I didn't know about, and they did it. And basically it said I had to pull out 30 gallons of salt water and put in 30 gallons of RODI, and that would then straighten it out. So I thought, well, that's no fun. And I thought, okay, I guess I could do it. I'm picturing my head, you know, a power head and a bucket, because I have to measure 30 gallons. I can't just guesstimate. And then one of them said, why don't you grab your old Skimmer pump that you used to use for the calcium reactor and set that up to just pump out a trickle all night long? So I did some math on that one myself with the calculator and realized that if I pumped out 60 milliliters a minute, that in 30 hours, I will have moved out 30 gallons of water. But that was too slow for me because I wanted to do my water change in like 21 hours. So I said, well, if I double it and use the Skimmer at its maximum speed of 120 milliliters, that means I'll be changing a gallon or draining a gallon every, I think it was 34 minutes. So roughly in about 15 hours, I'd be done. And basically that's what happened. I set up the Skimmer. I had to draw water from between the baffles after the skimmer zone. And it went into the Skimmer and it came out right into the French drain of the fish room and just trickled out super slowly for 16 hours. And after 16 hours, I checked the salinity of the tank and it was 1.026, which was awesome. So what I did was I pumped out salt water very slowly, and the top off replaced RODI water automatically as needed, just like it would if the tank was evaporating. Instead, I was just sucking out a gallon every 34 minutes, and it was putting one in. I had the top-off device set to check the water every 30 minutes. So it all worked out really, really well. And that was so convenient. I was actually impressed, and a couple of people said, work smarter, not harder. And I was like, yeah, that was really cool. So I was very happy about that. So if you're ever having to be in that situation, if you can use a dosing pump to remove one type of water and another dosing pump to put one in, you could actually get something similar to what I did. But remember, all I did was remove salt water and replace it with RODI to get my salinity back where I needed it to be, because it was too high, and I was trying to dilute it down a little bit without missing the mark. And see, that's the thing. You could make a mistake, especially if you're not setting some kind of alerts and reminders and alarms. But if you're being on top of it like I was, I checked on it. I checked on it multiple times. I went outside to see if anything weird was going on. I watched the water level in the sump, and it never, dropped suddenly. I didn't, allow it to pump in tons of fresh water at once using this dosing pump. It was much slower and gradualer. Gradular, that's a word, right? And I was able to handle business in a way that I didn't have to lift a thing. It was really, really nice. One more thing, another potential thing that might have happened to the reef. Like I said, I don't know. This time of year, normally in Texas, we have droughts. I haven't heard anything about drought warnings, but then again, I've been living in Netflix rather than the news, so maybe I missed an announcement. But a lot of times here in Texas, they will put extra stuff in the water during the summer to make it safe for human consumption. And that extra stuff in the water can pass right through our RODI systems and can actually affect the tank. And I haven't had to deal with that in about 5 years. But with what was happening in my tank on Friday, I had all Saturday to think about it while I wasn't here. And then when I got home on Sunday, I went to Frank's Tanks as soon as he opened up, and I took a bottle of Prime that I owned, and it was old. And I always tell you guys, always have Prime on hand, always have a new bottle for the year. Well, I had a bottle, it was about 3/4 full, but it didn't have a date on it, my mistake. And I just thought, well, I will go down there and I will have Frank, smell it in comparison to a new bottle and tell me if they smell the same, because it smelled bad to me. And he opened it up and he smelled it and he goes, smells all right to me. And he had a brand new bottle. And he didn't really want to open the new one because it has that little protective flap in there. I said, look, Frank, I'm buying the new bottle anyway. Just open it. Let's just find out. And so he smelled it and he says, I think it's fine. Yeah, I think you could still use the one you had. And I said, all right, give me the bottles. And I smelled it. No way would I have used the old bottle. The old one kind of smelled sulfuric to me, like bad eggs. And the new bottle smelled like something you would smell in what was it? In a hospital, I think it was. Hang on. I've got the bottle. Let me see if I can remind my nose. Where did I put that thing? So here's the bottle. This is Prime. This is by Seachem. This is used to lock up chlorine, chloramine, nitrate, nitrite, chlorine, ammonia. I mean, it takes out everything. I just don't know what it smells like. But what I had did not smell like this. So I told him, throw away my bottle, and I put that in my tank Sunday. And you put in a capful per 50 gallons, and it just locks things up and protects. So if I had things in my tank that had died, which we saw, adding ammonia to the water, this would lock it up. And it seemed like a very smart way to go with doing some protection. But also, like I said, this time of year, if you have a problem or you think there's a problem with the water that you're making yourself, you can add this to the RODI. And you just put in a capful per 50 gallons. If you have a 25-gallon container, you put half a capful. If you have an even smaller container, you're going to have to figure out, how much you need. Maybe it's something like 1 milliliter per 5 gallons. I don't know. But just figure out what it is. I know it's 1 capful per 50. That's what it's always been in my head for 20 years, and that's the number I use. So you use your own math to determine how much you need. I do know you can even use it at double the strength and it will not hurt your tank. So it is completely reef safe in that regard. So if you're in a situation where your tank is in crisis, which mine definitely was on Friday, and I should have done it Friday, but it didn't occur to me until Sunday, I put it in the tank then. And I also can put it in my top-off water, and I can put it in my brand new barrel of new salt water, just in case something's coming through the pipes I'm not aware of that I can't test for. So it's just one more thing to keep in mind. There's a possibility when you're trying to guess what happened in the tank. So If you aren't members of Club Mueller's Reef, you are welcome to join. It is a great group of people. We have about 8,000 members now. I think we probably crossed that threshold finally. And we're there to help. We're there to answer questions. We're there to share pretty pictures. We're there to talk about ideas. We are not there to berate or make anyone feel bad or put them down or insult them. So it's a nice, safe group. And if someone is being bad, they are removed forever. So that's our group. So feel free to join. Also, I did want to mention, I was very proud of you guys this week. I didn't mention anything last week about buying anything from the shop, but if you do, it helps pay the bills. And so I do appreciate when you buy things from MuellersReef.com. And you have been doing it without prompting, which was really, really nice. I saw orders coming in all week. I was working really hard to fill orders as I just watched the reef kind of calm down and take care of itself. And I'm really glad to see that it's doing better, because it was very unnerving to see what was happening. And I wanted to film some of that decay for you guys so you could really get a good picture. Because back in the day when we would talk about RTN, you had to look at a picture of RTN, and you didn't have moving pictures. I mean, now YouTube does everything. And to show that stuff just billowing in the branches and shedding off the bottom of the colony and just drifting across. Oh, and also, when I did my giant water change, and I brought the water all the way down to here, when I put water back in, there was all this slime coming off of this coral and a few others. So I took a turkey baster and I blew it off of everything I could in the tank to kind of just get it off and hopefully get it to go down the drain and get pulled out by the protein skimmer, or maybe caught on the clear sea. Just get it off the corals themselves. And those big water changes, you know I don't like doing water changes, but they are a good way of letting your corals kind of slough off an outer coating of slime, because they're exposed to some air briefly and they stress up, or whatever you want to call it. They put up their protective moisture, and then you add all the water and you see all that stuff coming off the coral, and it's actually shedding some of that crud. It kind of gives them a nice breath of fresh air or fresh water, however you want to look at it. So, it's okay to do it. I don't normally do it very often, but I did it twice in 1 week, and I'm looking at the tank today and things are still alive. So all said, between the change in the salinity and the 2 monster water changes, the 450-gallon system, because that's what this whole system is behind me with the anemone cube and the sump, has had 450 gallons of water changed in 1 week flat. It's a monster change. And I'm halfway tempted to do another one because I'm kicking Nitrate's butt. Might as well just do it. And, now that I've put the corals through, let's call it the stress test, of a giant water change twice, I mean, fingers crossed that nothing weird happens today, because I did last night. But if all goes well, then, I can just feel like there's nothing to fear about doing another big one just to get the nitrates down. And, while it sucks to spend $80 in salt each time I do a water change, I think about how many bottles of Nopox I bought. I guess salt water is cheaper, but not by much. Alrighty, let me go to look at all your questions, and then we're going to wrap this up because I got something to go do today. So anyway, I wanted to bring you up to speed. And, like I said, I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys have to say. In the meantime, I will throw that video back on the screen while I'm looking at some questions, because it's pretty. Get to watch the fish eat some nori again. And I wonder if I can do this. Ha! I can enlarge it just enough to fill your screen. Nice. All right, let me turn off that other thing. I'm not trying to hit you with a subliminal message forever. All right, so let me look at the questions. See a lot of comments about the sound not doing well, and I just talked for almost an hour. So if you heard nothing, I apologize. Benjamin says, if I were to add more live rock to an existing established aquarium, will I experience any problems? I would say no. As long as your live rock is under salt water in advance before it goes in the aquarium, it shouldn't do anything weird. if you were like bringing live rock from the fish store that was in a box that just got shipped in from the ocean, you need to put that inside a barrel of salt water for a few weeks just to let any kind of ammonia die off and let it just be pure, clean live rock. And then you can put that in your tank. You can definitely add it. Let's see. Benjamin says, what is your go-to on removing fish? How do you do it in an established reef? Benjamin, some of the ways of removing fish from a reef tank involve just changing a truckload of water, because as you pump out all the water, you give them very little room to swim, and you can scoop them out that way off the sand bed. But another method is to use a fish trap. I've watched some people expertly remove a fish with a net, and it's amazing. They will put some food in the water, the fish goes for it, and like a flash, the net hits the water and they scoop out that fish. I've seen it once or twice in my life, and I'm constantly amazed by it. But the risk is when you're trying to work in a tank that you're going to hit corals or snag it, snag the net on things and damage, the corals you're caring about. And that's the hard part. JB was suggesting, could the nutrients have been out of balance? Well, they were the same nutrients they've been for a very long time. I don't know about out of balance, but they could have just been a tipping point. And that's what I was saying before, that maybe I finally hit the threshold where I had so much nitrate that the tank had enough. Dylan says, I was looking into cause, and it could be philaster parasite, which is only visible under a microscope. The other thing people look at is alkalinity, and maybe look at a UV sterilizer. A couple people this week had suggested a UV, or they suggested ozone. These are things that I don't have and have never used. I don't know that there was a parasite, and because it's not continuing to happen elsewhere in the tank, I'm thinking not. Jamie says, when you changed up the skimmer, did it change the nitrate levels for the better? I don't think so, because all it pulled out was about 3 gallons of skimmate in a matter of 3 or 4 days. And out of a 450-gallon system, I don't think that's enough. Now, if I had pulled out 20, 30 gallons of skimmate, basically like 5 gallons a day or something, then I could see that it was that. I just think I was starting to pull out something finally after so long of not doing it. Rob says, have you ever used Fritz RPM Blue Box? If so, how long can I store it mixed before I use it? There's something strange about the Fritz salt that I've been told. I don't know that I believe it, but I've been told it, that you have to mix it and use it, that you can't just keep it going long term. And that's just super strange to me, because I've always had salt water mixed in the background ready at the, as needed for when there's an emergency, like what had happened here. Fortunately, I was really glad that my poly tank was filled at the top with water. I had just filled up with water that week right before this thing happened, and all I had to do was put salt in the container and get it mixed up, and it had 6-7 hours to mix before I actually did my water change. But I guess the only thing I could tell you to do, okay, so let me tell you this. When you are doing salt water in a barrel or in a poly tank and you're storing it for long term, before you use it, you have to check the alkalinity and probably buffer it back up to where it belongs. For some reason, I've noticed that alkalinity does drop out on these salt mixes. I don't remember that being the case back in the day when I used things like Kent Sea Salt or Red Sea Pro, Coral Pro. Those salts worked really well for me, and I don't remember the alkalinity dropping. I just was able to change water. It was great. But now, for the last few years, maybe that's just something different in the recipes, this decade. But Aquavitro did it. There was another brand of salt I used. I mixed it up, and a few days later, or a week later, or a month later, I checked the water, and it was lower, and I just buffered it back up, and that was ready to use. Rick, thank you very much. Yeah, he's mentioned the ICP lab can test give you some precise reports. Yeah, it's funny. All this is going on. I still haven't grabbed a sample to send to them. Would have been great to grab a sample the day it happened. Brian says, Mike Paletta uses a 50-50 mix of sodium bicarbonate and sodium carbonate. Do you know why? It's a blended method of dosing alkalinity, and some people like it. I've never used that method. I always just use straight soda ash, which is baking soda. And so I think mine is, I always get this backwards, but I think mine's the sodium bicarbonate. God, I hope I said that right. I probably said the opposite of what I meant. So I'm just telling you I use soda ash, and I don't mix them. Patmalu, thank you very much for the super chat. He says, dough for more coral. I'm actually glad that I still have both corals that were hardest hit. You know, it didn't wipe out the tank entirely. You know, I didn't lose it all. It's, I have some remainder. So we'll just see if I can hang on to what's left and start the growing all over again. Same with that chalice. I lost probably 65, 70% of that really pretty chalice that a lot of you liked. And but I have a piece, and if it does well, it'll just keep going. Let's see. Ryan says, I had the same thing happen to my strawberry shortcake. It sucks when it happens. Luckily, my sunset Montipora seems to be recovering. That's good news. Oh, there's one more thing I did this week that I forgot to mention. I ran a lot of fresh carbon in the reactor. I filled it up. Normally, I would put in 4.5 cups of carbon to handle my system. You know, a cup of carbon. No. Too many numbers in my head today. I think it's a half a cup of carbon per 50 gallons. And so I put in 2. I don't know. I have to actually look at my notes because I'm sure I'm saying it wrong. I've got live stream brain. That happens. But anyway, I doubled the amount of carbon I normally run. And I was really impressed with how nice the water looked a couple days later. It looked crystal clear. It was amazing. And the reason I ran a whole bunch of carbon was to pull out any kind of toxins from the water because of the risk that it would continue whatever was happening in the tank, that it could start in another spot, and I didn't want that to happen. Adam, thank you very much for the super chat. I appreciate that. And hello from Sweden to you. Hello from the US to you. I like that you guys are here from all over the world. Sleeping Giant says, my leather coral had a giant hole all the way through it, about the size of a quarter, when I purchased it from a local reefer, and I blew out the hole and sucked out the debris in the hole with a turkey baster, and it took about 2 months to close and heal. Well, mine, the hole looked big enough that you could probably put an avocado or a lemon in there. So I'm planning to pull it off the rock, since it seems to have collapsed, and put it down low in the back of the tank so I can enjoy it back there and not have it where it was. It'll be kind of a new spot, and I think it'll work out well. I just have to rearrange a couple of things. Mass says, with regards to the calculator, hamazreef.com has a resulting salinity calculator like the one you were talking about. Yeah, I think that's the one I was on. He has like 19 different calculators there, and I believe that's the one I used. And then for my alkalinity adjustments, I use the one I was talking about from JDEC, which is Reef Chemistry Calculator. Let's see. Matt says, how do you find keeping SPS and high nitrates? Well, you know, I mean, my reef lives in spite of me, is what I've said for a long, long time. But normally we like to have lower numbers, somewhere under 20, potentially under 10. A lot of people love the number 5 when it comes to nitrate, but you just never really have an absolute, this is the one no matter what kind of number. But mine had been creeping up over the last couple of years, and it was weird. And like I said in a previous stream, the nitrates and the phosphates both have been a real battle for like the last 6 months. And, you know, people are telling me, oh, it's old tank syndrome, that's what's happening. And I thought, man, it just doesn't make sense with me. And that's when it dawned on me that my skimmer wasn't pulling anything out. I mean, there was definitely sludge all over the lid of the collection cup. And there was about 1 inch of skimmate in the waste collector, but that was like a week or 2, and I had 1 inch of liquid, which is crazy. And so I changed the way the skimmer skims to skim more wet, to push more liquid out. And a few people said, well, if you do that, you got to watch your salinity, which I am doing. That's why I recommend testing your water every week, to see where you're at and make sure you make any adjustments as needed. Skinner says, I have sea grapes, which is an aggressive macro that's made in the display and rooted on the rocks. What can I do? Well, you're going to have to pull it off manually, and you need a cleanup crew. And if you add like things like emerald crabs, they can also help to kind of nip that in the bud, but it takes some time. It's kind of a battle. So I had some caulerpa, some grape caulerpa that got into my angle tank, and every week I'd reach in there with tweezers or forceps, and I'd pluck out as much as I could, which was a real pain. I hated doing it because it was just so time-consuming and frustrating, and it kept growing back. And I did this for months. And then one day I'm looking in there, and I see an emerald crab, and he's getting the last of it. And I was like, are you kidding me? You're helping me? I love you. And he just kept working on it. It was amazing. And then it was gone from the tank finally. Mark says, hey Mark, do you ship to the UK? I do. It just depends what you need. What I need to know is what you want, how many of that you want, and your postal code so I can look up what shipping would cost. Ahmad says, my tank is full of red slime. What is the main cause of this problem? I've tried Red Cyano RX, but still cannot handle this problem. Can you help me or give me any idea how to remove it? Yes, follow my directions on my website exactly, and don't listen to anyone else's advice on how to use it. Because if you're following another method, you're going to be dealing with what you see in your tank now. My directions are pretty simple. You turn off the protein skimmer, you stop running carbon, you put in the Red Cyano RX, and you let it ferment in the tank for 3 days. No skimmer, no carbon. Don't just take the cup off your skimmer, turn off the skimmer. Take the skimmer out of your system, clean it. And then, after 3 days, if the cyano is still present in your tank, treat the tank again with more Red Cyano RX and wait 2 more days. At this point, it should be completely gone. Now you do a giant water change, and then you put your skimmer back in and you dial it down as low as you can. And odds are the skimmer will keep overflowing, and you just keep dumping out the collection cup as quickly as you have to for the next 6 hours, replacing all that water you're throwing away that looks totally normal. Just throw it away and put in more salt water to replace it. And if you do everything I just described, like I said in my article on my website, your red slime will be gone. And it takes 5 days. G asks me, what salt do you use again? This is Aquavitro's Salinity. It's a Seachem brand. Ramesis says, I'm glad to see your tank survived. Looks like you had some something, but it still looks amazing. Yeah, I definitely lost some coral there in the middle, but it's not the end of the world, and everything on the bottom half of the tank was completely unaffected. And a lot of the stuff on the top of the tank is actually okay too, so I got lucky. But I'm still kind of watching things closely to see if anything else changes. Like a blue tort decided to go up in smoke. But for now, it seems like it's okay. Michael says, is there a reason why you say to match the pH of new saltwater instead of testing the alkalinity? Glad your tank is back on track. Actually, pH is how I used to do it. I would check the pH of the tank, I'd check the pH of the barrel, I'd buffer the barrel to bring the pH up. But the buffer that we use that raises pH is actually an alkalinity buffer. So I tell people compare pH. But really what you are doing, like you said, is you're comparing and dosing the alkalinity. You get the alkalinity of both water volumes the same. So yeah, either one is the same. Whichever one you work with, it's going to do the exact same process. Mark says, can you explain what RTN is? It stands for Rapid Tissue Necrosis, and it's when the corals in your tank are dying rapidly. I mean, mine was dying with a capital R. It was so fast. So I just had to jump in there and remove it. And, I talked with Drew, because it's Drew's acro. I said, hey, Drew, your coral is dying in my tank. And he said, well, it'll look good on the shelf. And I said, your shelf or my shelf? And then he told me, I was thinking your shelf. I'm like, I don't usually keep skeletons around to remind me of what went wrong. But this is a nice big piece. Maybe I should just bleach it out and put it somewhere. I don't know. I'm not going to put it in the calcium reactor. I know that. A lot of people always say that, but I'm not going to do it. I find that dead coral skeleton, when you put it in the calcium reactor, the effluent of the calcium reactor just seems to measure high in phosphate. So that's not really beneficial. Benjamin says, what do you think about ordering fish online that you can't buy in a store? What's your experience? I've actually bought quite a few fish over the last 15 years online. I prefer to buy them in a store because I like to see the fish and see them eating and observe how they interact with other fish. Look at them over, see if there's no disease, visible to the eye. And if I really like the fish, I'll buy it. But I've bought a few online, and they arrived perfectly healthy. I've had some arrive that were dead in the bag. I mean, just like the fish store. They open up bags and some stuff's already dead in there. But live aquaria is a really good choice when it comes to buying fish, especially Diver's Den. That is the ones that have been hand cared for longer. They, at least for a very long time, had a 14-day guarantee. I don't know if that guarantee still exists. I haven't ordered from them in a few years. Matt says, I'm battling new tank syndrome. Transferred tanks 2 months ago. I had to rehome all the corals due to never-ending battle with nitrates. Hey, I know about nitrates, so if you want to do a ginormous water change, you can get your corals back. Let's see. Poseidon's Reef says, thank you for the Planet Aquarium Overflow cover. It works like a charm. Great. I'm glad to hear that. Chad says, when using a new salt mix, what is the maximum water change percentage I can do? So I'm thinking you mean you're switching from one brand of salt to another. So if you're going from like Instant Ocean to Tropic Marin, I wouldn't do a giant water change in that regard because the recipe is vastly different between those companies. That's my assumption. So I would suggest instead that you go ahead and do smaller water changes. Like, I don't know what size tank you have, but let's just pretend your tank is a 50-gallon and you normally change, I don't know, 10 gallons a week. Maybe change 5 gallons a week for the first month with the newer salt. And then, you can go back to your normal routine. Benjamin says, are cleaner shrimp and pistol shrimp compatible? I don't believe that they are going to fight each other, if that's what you're asking. They won't hang out together. Rick says, love your outlook. You have a positive impact on the world. Well, I try to be optimistic rather than pessimistic. And even as the corals were dying, you guys heard in the video, I said to myself, well, that gives me some space in the tank to plant new corals. It's not what I wanted, but it is what it is. Oh my goodness. So Poseidon's Reef says, I'm currently cycling my 400-gallon system. Awesome. And I have 10 1-inch tanks in quarantine. After my cycle is done, can I add them all at once? Yes, you can, and that's awesome, and I want to see pictures or video. And do not shoot it vertically. Shoot me a horizontal video. I want to see it. Maybe you can post it in Club Milo's Reef, or if you have a YouTube channel, stick it on there and send me a link. I love seeing little tiny tangs, and I'd like to see your 10 swimming around in your 400-gallon. That's amazing. Hey, Mike, thank you very much for the super chat. He says it's for Spock's Banana Fund. John says, how do you like your white-tailed bristletoothed tang? Do you have any advice specific to them? It's one of my dream fish. I really like that fish, and unfortunately, it's got a problem on its head around the eyes that's been a problem for a long time. And even the vet that was here, she said, well, it's not good. But she said, but the fish is not acting erratic or like it's in pain or anything. And she had thrown out at me the idea of lower the nitrates in the tank, and maybe this will start to solve itself. Maybe that fish is more prone to higher nitrates, and so it's affecting the head area. And it really is bad looking, and I feel bad for that fish. But I feed a lot of nori, trying to give it what I thought it was lacking in diet, and that's what it caused this. I mean, it doesn't look like HLLE to me. It's like it kind of reminds me of a nutrition deficit, because I've heard that a lot of times the meat around the face is stored fat, and when they're starving or something like that. I mean, the fish didn't look starving, but this weird area around the head, I felt like it was lacking something. And so I was guessing, I guess it's these stupid nitrates, and maybe that's what's causing it. Well, now that the nitrates are down, and if I can keep them down for the rest of the year, then maybe I can just watch that fish just slowly heal over time. But I really love that fish, to answer your question, because it's a very active cleaner. It's constantly looking at things to eat on the glass, the rock, even nipping at corals a little bit here and there. It's a very useful tang to have in your aquarium. And it fits in smaller tanks too. Ryan says, he did the same. I did 2 big water changes and the tank is now back on track. That's awesome. That gives me hope. Glad to hear it. I have a 25-gallon tank and I dose the Prodibio Reef kit. I love the product, but my skimmer overflows for a week after I use it. Any tips? Anything you think I'm doing that's wrong? Okay, so what is actually happening is the Reef Booster, which is the food, and the Coral Vits, which is the vitamins, those two make the protein skimmer go bonkers. And what you're going to have to do, unfortunately, is let the skimmer drain as much as it wants to drain into something nearby, something big, and have your top off replace what's being drained out of the skimmer with salt water. So instead of topping off with RODI, you're going to top off with salt water and let the protein skimmer just remove that stuff. And if you do it that way, within a matter of so many hours, it'll be resolved. That's the end of the video. So that is what I recommend. That's why I don't like using Reef Booster and Coral Vits as much. I use it from time to time, but I always use Bioptim, Biodigest, Stronti Plus, and IOD Plus. Now, there's another thing that I did on Sunday when I talked with others about what I should do, and they had suggested iodine in the tank might help with the healing of the corals, and I couldn't find my bottle of Lugol's solution, which is crazy because I had a bottle, and you use a dropper, so you drop a tiny bit, which means I probably have like 98% of that bottle somewhere. Can't find it anywhere. But I had the IOD Plus from Prodibio in the Pro Vials, and 1 Pro Vial was supposed to treat my tank, and since the tank was going to hell, I put in 2 as a just in case, because I'm sure it's somehow diluted in that vial. And I put that in my tank because it's what I had. But I want to order a new bottle of Lugol solution since mine has mysteriously vanished. It's always weird when something just evaporates in my house because I'm going to find it at some point. I just thought of a place where it might be. It might be inside an old aquarium stand. I'll have to check. All right. Kevin Jones says a pistol shrimp might hunt a cleaner shrimp if it gets the chance. I've never seen that. I mean, I've had a couple pistol shrimp in my experience, and they just never did anything but make little noises in the tank. Matter of fact, something in my tank every single night, somewhere around 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, does this weird rattle sound. It's like a clockle, 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 clockle. And that's kind of what it sounds like. And I'm thinking it's a snail that's like spinning against the glass. But it's every night, and it's always around that time, and never any other time of day. And I'm just thinking, do I have some weird shrimp that's in my sand bed I'm not aware of? I mean, it doesn't sound like a pistol shrimp, but I was thinking maybe I've got some creature that I thought's been gone for a long time that's actually back. Who knows? So anyway, maybe you should be cautious. I thought they'd be okay in the tank together, but Kevin is indicating there may be a risk. I guess it depends on the size of the pistol shrimp and how hungry it is. Chris says, Red Sea recommends a DKH of 12 for accelerated growth as long as you have nutrients to support this. Do you think this is too high? I currently stay at 9. Well, the general rule of thumb has always been keep your alkalinity somewhere between 8 and 11. So going 12 and above is usually kind of, I'm going to say, frowned upon. And if you have enough nutrients in the water, the higher alkalinity is great. And when your tank is nutrient poor, a lot of people really are urging others to keep very low alkalinity, somewhere around 7, which is really low to me. So, and apparently there's a correlation. Low nutrients, you need 7. High nutrients, you can have higher. But I didn't know Red Sea was recommending 12. That seems pretty high. I've done it. I've had my tank at high numbers before. But I'd say keep it somewhere between 8 and 11. If you like 9 and you want to try something a little more edgy, maybe take it up to 10.5 and keep it there. But I wouldn't go from your 9 to 12 just because you're hoping for accelerated growth. Just enjoy what happens in your tank and let it grow. Matt says, do you quarantine your new arrivals? When I buy a new fish, which is super rare, someone even asked me, like, do you ever buy a fish? it seems like maybe once a year I get a fish, maybe twice. I don't know. I'd have to look, but I don't remember what's new in the tank. You know, stuff I have is years old. But when I get a new fish, ever since 2011, they went through safety stop instead of a quarantine tank. And I've really liked that product, and it spoiled me from having to do a quarantine tank. I know it's not as bulletproof safe as a quarantine tank would be, and waiting 21 days to 45 days before you introduce them in your tank. And maybe if I want to get a shoal of Anthias, I should do just that. But I've found that putting certain fish in a quarantine tank, they end up dying there, where when you put them in your reef, they live. So it's kind of a weird scenario of which is the better choice. And in my scenario, I prefer to put it in the tank. So what I do is they go through safety stop, which is a 2-hour bath. It's part A and part B. So they acclimate for 20 minutes, then they go into part A, and then they go in for 45 minutes, then they go in part B for 45 minutes. So then I have to, get it out of there, and I put it in the Peacemaker, which hangs in my aquarium for 3 days. And it shares the same water as the reef, but nobody can fight because they're in a box with a million holes. And that way the fish can be stressed as much as it wants, and the other fish can smell the stress in the water, but they can't act on it because he is cocooned in a nice, safe acrylic box. And after 3 days, I pour that new fish, just out of the box into the tank, and there is no aggression whatsoever. So this has been what I've been doing for many years with no weird results. No surprises. I didn't pour a fish in the tank and all of a sudden there's this monster fight going on in the tank. There's nothing like that. So it works for me. But obviously the highest recommendation by all the fish experts are to use a quarantine tank and wait at least 21 days, observe them, and if you see anything, medicate at that point, which could drag it out even longer. It could be 45 days, it could be 60 days before they ever get in your tank. But I know so many people that buy stuff and put in their quarantine tank and it just dies in there because the filtration is just not as good as your reef. So, and if you're not staying on top of those water changes on that quarantine tank daily to keep everything nice and perfect, you could lose some really nice fish. And so that's one of the reasons why you don't see me buying a lot of fish, because I don't want to risk the ones I have with somebody new. Tiger Bite says, why does no one think a fully Euphilia tank is cool? I'm sure a lot of people think it's cool. I've seen some tanks that are just filled with wall hammer. I think there's one up in Denver. It's just a monster tank of only hammer. That's it. The whole tank is hammer. I'm not talking about frags. I'm talking about a giant colony with water. It's amazing. And it makes a lot of people happy. Mark says, this is my first tank, 120 liters. That's like 30 gallons maybe? I'm told I can't have a yellow tank due to the size of the tank. Are there any tanks that would be happy in this size tank? No, that tank is too small. If you want to drop in like a little baby 1-inch hippo tank for now, while you're enjoying your first tank for the first year, then yes. But even I have people that are grumbling at me that I have Dory inside my 60-gallon tank, and they want it to be moved. And at some point, I will catch her if I'm lucky, because she is very skittish. But eventually, she'll move out of there, and that's on my list. But I started off as a 1-inch fish, and when they're tiny, you can get away with it. But the yellow tang would not do well inside 120 liters, I don't think. USA Carp Angler says, have you ever battled dinos or Bryopsis during the lifespan of a tank? If so, what were your solutions? So actually, I've had to fight both, but I mean, the dino flagellants never got to the point where it got out of control. I started to see it in my tank, and I dealt with it instantly before it could go nuts. And so in that regard, I removed the offending item, and I rinsed it off in a barrel of salt water, and I put it back in the tank a few times. And that seemed to remove 90% of it. It's almost like you irritated the stuff right off the system, and it didn't get a chance to spread into the reef. The other thing that I did was, years ago, someone came up with a thread on Reef to Reef about dosing hydrogen peroxide in your aquarium to kill dinoflagellates in the aquarium. And so I did that for 8 days, and what little bits of hints of dinos I saw were gone. A long time ago, I didn't even know what they were at the time. I had dinoflagellates growing in a refugium under my 29-gallon, and all I did was take a soup ladle, because it's like a big little bowl, and I lowered it down into the water so that all the stuff on the surface that was disgusting would pour into the ladle, and I would pour that into a bucket near me, and I would just ladle out spoon after spoon after spoon to get that crud off the surface, and I just removed it. I didn't even know it was dinos at the time, and because I didn't know. And then recent years, I haven't had any in a long time, but I had a theory since it got rid of some red cyanobacteria out of my frag tank. I told some of the people on this channel, if you're watching this and you have some dinoflagellates, if you'd like to try Live Rock Enhance, I have a feeling that bacteria will outcompete the dinoflagellates and kill them off. And results were mixed. Some people said it worked, some people said it didn't. I don't know why. But it does seem to be a possible way of solving it, using natural bacteria that eats decomposing stuff. It's a really nice product for cleaning up your live rock. So it can help. And then, of course, there's products on the market like Dino X by Fauna Marin that tells you exactly how to do their 3-week treatment to get rid of them. And then the other part of your question was about Bryopsis. Yes, I got a big piece of live rock from a hobbyist that moved away, and we put it in my tank so we could put all of his corals on that rock. And when we put that rock in my tank, suddenly I had Bryopsis. And I said to him, "What is this green algae? It does not come off. This is not hair algae." He says, "Oh, that must be Bryopsis." I'm like, "Well, thanks." And he said, "Well, I had a fox face." I'm like, "Okay." And he says, "Well, they eat it." I was like, "Oh, well, I'm not buying a fox face. I don't like that fish." And so I had to deal with it myself. And what I ended up doing was I bought lettuce nudibranchs, which are really, really pretty. And it's like putting a feather in your aquarium. They are so light. They will blow right through the tank. They'll get sucked into a power head. It's ridiculous. But I would find them, wherever they were in the tank, and I'd put them back on the Bryopsis, and they would eat it until they got blown elsewhere again. Or I'd find them down the refugium, and I'd take them out of the refugium, take them back up to the tank, and put them back on the Bryopsis. And it took a few weeks to get them to eat it all out of the tank. And I had some Bryopsis in the top of my overflow box where the teeth was. And what I did there was I lowered the water level in the tank a couple of inches, and then I dribbled or dripped, however you want to describe it, I drizzled peroxide right on those plants exposed in the air 2 or 3 times over a 5-minute span. And then I turned the return pump back on, and added more water to the tank. And what happened was that Bryopsis turned white over the next 3 days and then just flaked off and was gone. So those are some of the techniques I used over the years to get rid of those things. I haven't had them ever since. All right. Mike says, "Did you end up testing your nitrate?" Yes. I tested it with Salifert, and I tested it with API. With Salifert, it's pink, so that's not great, but it wasn't purple, so that's good. I really couldn't figure out what strength it was. It's so hard to read that one for me. I know people love the Salifert kit, but when I look down, it's only this much liquid, and the problem is the light goes through the beaker and puts these weird shadows. I want it to be a smooth bottom container, like the glass vial from Elos or something, but it would have to be the right height of the liquid in that vial to get what I need, so I can't. So anyway, I was like, all right, fine, I can't tell, so I'll just use my API kit. And when I used my API kit, it looked like it was somewhere between 20 and 40. I'm guessing today I'm at 30. So that's good. The numbers are down. Adam says, "Did this event cause any ill effects to your anemone tank?" No, but I did wonder if all these giant water changes are going to promote a bunch of splits in the anemone cube, which is definitely a possibility. I mean, that much water being changed, that's what anemones do. You feed them, you change a bunch of water, and they just split. And I haven't seen any. I think maybe one did split, but it wasn't anything obvious. It was just kind of like, maybe that's a split. It was one of the roses. But it was kind of near the rockworks. I couldn't quite tell. But the thing was, the way it was sitting on the overflow box and the rock, that area They have an oral disc with all these tentacles, and the mouth is on the edge of the oral disc, which made me think that was an enemy that tore itself in half because they always have a mouth on one side and then they heal and fill in and become a whole anemone again. So I might have had one split. I might have 10 split. We'll see. But no, I didn't see anything else happen in that tank. I didn't have any other corals that are just like going up in smoke. That's why I shared the video with you guys, to show you how the tank was looking. The Weasel says, I just joined. Do you have the RTN under control? The answer is yes. You don't have to watch the stream. You can just stop. Aquablog. That's funny. I like the way you spelled that. Says, hello from Poland. Matt says, Safety Stop has just become available in the UK. Well, that's great. I've been telling people to use this stuff for a decade. Not sure if I should try and skip the quarantine. So here's the other thing. You can use Safety Stop on your brand new fish, and then you can put it in quarantine. So now you've knocked off all the external parasites right as soon as you got them out of the bag. And now you put them in quarantine, and now you can just observe them and feed them. So there's nothing wrong with that. That's definitely a very safe method. Jamie says, my tank sits at around 8.4 DKH, and I'd like to bring it up to 9.5, as I've heard the benefits of better growth. So how long would you recommend bringing it up over? I'd say bring it up over the next week or so. If you're dosing something right now, use the Reef chemistry calculator to determine how much you're going to need to dose to get that higher number, and then just kind of ramp up your dosing pump. Or if you're pouring it in manually, because that's always the smart thing to do when you're first learning how to dose, just add a little bit more. So if you're doing 15 milliliters a day now, do 16 or 17. You know, just a little tiny increase, and test and see where your numbers are going to avoid overshooting it. Wow. Rob says, my LFS keeps their salinity at 1.015. Man, for that reason, I don't buy fish from them. I get all my stuff from Live Aquaria. Not always Diver's Den. It always arrived healthy and hungry. That's good. Yeah, that's really low. And the reason the fish store is doing that is they're trying to eliminate ick in their system. They're just trying to keep it down. But that same store probably has higher salinity in the tank where the corals are being sold. But yeah, that's really low. The fish store by me, I think his fish system is like 1.021. Battle OCR says, okay, so it's cool to do a baby tank of fish. I look at my big tank, I would think it would be so cool to have 50 tanks and there's babies. See, I think anything's really fun at first. It's just the long term, what are you going to do afterwards? Like when I wanted to put 40 clownfish in my anemone cube, I asked somebody that breeds clownfish. I said, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think? He says, don't do 40. I'm like, oh. And he said, just do 20. I was like, all right. And he says, and expect to have to rehome a bunch of them as they start battling. And I was like, oh, because I wanted to have all these clowns. When I went to visit a public aquarium in California, I can't remember which one it was, but they had this really amazing tank. It was huge. It's probably 1,500, 2,000, 2,500 gallons. I don't know. Big, big tank. Tall. Lots of rock going up on both sides. You could look through the rock and you saw so many clownfish and hippos. And they were just all swimming every direction like confetti. It was amazing. I was like, that's what I want in my house. But they have a monster filtration system to pull that off. And, long term, will that work? Probably not. So anyway, I think I got 16 fish from Tammy, and I put them in. And at this point, I believe I have 12. And it's been 3 or 4 years. So it went really well. I didn't have to rehome any. There's a few in my frag tank that I moved over because of aggression. And the rest all seem to tolerate each other and work together. They seem happy. There's no chasing. But if you were there was a guy, he posted a video on Facebook in one of the saltwater groups, and he had this huge tank. I don't know, some kind of he had some corals, but it was really a fish-only system. And he put in something like 20 or 30 hippo tanks, and they were little tiny ones, and it was so neat. And I was just like, I love it. And everyone's like, oh, you can't do that. That's not smart. That's not healthy. What are you going to do when those fish are all big? All the negativity came out. And I was like, dude, that's awesome. I love it. And I said, but seriously, what are you going to do? And he said, they're all going to go to other homes. But right now, while they're babies, I get to enjoy them. I was like, yeah, that is amazing. So if you, I mean, I went to a fish store years ago and said, look, I want to buy a whole bunch of baby hippo tanks. And he said, okay. I said, well, how much are they? And I think he said they were, I don't know, $35 each, $41 each, something like that. I said, what if I want to get 16 of them? And he said, 16 times 41. I was kind of hoping for a deal because I'm buying a bunch. And he was like, nope. Well, I was like, all right. So I just didn't buy them. And that's the end of that story. It didn't happen. But yeah, if you want to set up something now, and even if you set up a small tank, and you do get some little tiny yellow tank, and it's a 6-month aquarium. In other words, you're upgrading to a 120 or a 180 or a 240. I'm not going to tell you you can't have that little tiny yellow tank right now in a little tiny tank because you're planning to upgrade. Now, if you're never going to upgrade, then don't do it. That's the point. You have to think, where's this going? And when I put the little tiny hippo tank inside my anemone cube, it was 1 inch. It's been in there for years, and it's gotten bigger. It's at the point now where I need to remove it. But at the time, that little tiny guy darting around was super adorable. Heck, I wouldn't even mind putting another tiny one in there all over again. But I think I'll put something different. I don't know what, but I want to put something else in that tank. Someone had suggested maybe, I think it was Bengai cardinalfish, because they can kind of hover around the tentacles and not be affected. So that's kind of a neat idea. It needs to be something that can swim around and still kind of dodge anemones. Battle OCR says, what's your favorite tang? Spock. And Aftershock says, do you have any advice on keeping elegance corals? No, I've never kept one. Back when they were popular, everyone was buying them, everyone was killing them, and I was just like, I don't think we know what we're doing, and I just never got one. And when I talked with friends saying, hey, I'm thinking about getting one after all these years, they look at me like, why would you do that? And I was like, okay, never mind. So all I know is that they get really big, and they can be really aggressive to, like big long sweepers, I guess. So I've just never done it, so I don't have any advice. I guess Google is your friend. Benjamin says, which is better, the blue tuxedo urchin or the red tuxedo urchin? I don't think I've ever seen a red one. I like the blue ones. I've always bought the blue ones. Let's see. Skinner says, will peroxide work to kill the Caulerpa sea grapes also, if I remove one rock at a time and treat? I don't know. You might consider if I don't know what size tank you're dealing with, but if you can't manually pluck this stuff off and then add a cleanup crew to work in there, then maybe you should look at possibly using something like Reef Flux, which is, or FluxRx, either one of those. They're both out on the market. It's fluconazole, and that's used to kill off algae in an aquarium, and you could possibly use that, and maybe that will help solve your problem. Rob, who says I'm selling them? You know I'm a hoarder. He asked if he could buy one of my splits if it happens. Safety stop does not work for corals also. It is literally only for fish, and it's not even for every single fish. So you have to read the instructions, but there's a couple things they say not to use it with, and they definitely say not to use it with a fish covered in ick. So if you just have this fish and like, oh, it's in ick, it's the poor thing, I'm going to save it, I'm going to put it in safety stop, don't do it. And why? I don't know. But they say not to, so I just said okay, and I didn't debate it. Yeah. Kevin Jones says, is that an eat, reef, sleep, repeat shirt? Yes, it is. Yeah, I actually have been looking for it. So here's what I did. I have a lot of t-shirts, too many to be honest. And what I did was I pulled out a whole bunch, and I got to like the next section of them. And every day for the last, I don't know, 10 days or so, I pulled the next one off the shelf and put it on and worked my way down. I was like, there's my Eat, Sleep, Reef shirt. I've been looking for you. It was at the very bottom. So, and the stack of clean ones is now up to my hip in the closet. It's crazy. Benjamin says, I remember 15 years ago, a lot of people dumped leathers because of the allelopathy, but others say carbon would handle it. So that's my question, when will Linseed Torta be available in the store? And never. Matter of fact, my parents have been asking me for some, and I haven't even made one for them. But thank you for asking. No, running carbon with a leather is smart. My leather is only about this big. It's just not a giant one like the one I used to have, so I don't really think it's a problem, but I don't know. I was kind of disappointed that I found that hole in it. Like I said, I'm being hyper aware of everything in my tank now to see if I'll stumble into something that's like, that's what caused all this. But it could be a combination of several things, or it could be something I have no idea about. I don't know that I'll figure it out. But as long as it's gone, that's what really matters the most. DeWeasel says, you should do some React videos to other Reef tanks. It'd be interesting to hear your comments on other systems. You know, I think some other YouTubers are doing that now, and I try not to copy other people, especially if they have a shtick. You know, that's their thing. I do sometimes film people's tanks, and I did film a bunch of tanks last year during all my travels, and I want to post those up. And they're not really reaction videos. It's more like a review or an overview of this tank. And I'm hoping that when I have the time to sit down and edit those, you guys will really enjoy them. Rob says, nice thing about Safety Stop also is you can reuse the bats on multiple fish. Yeah, within 8 hours of mixing. That's correct. You can just kind of cycle fish after fish after fish until about 8 hours. But you have to keep the water oxygenated, and you have to keep the temperature up so it doesn't get too cold in the buckets. Jamie says, my toadstool has been looking grumpy for about 2 weeks now. None of the polyps are out. Do you have any advice? Well, you could run the carbon, first of all. That would help. And then you should sit back across the room at night when the room is dark and just the tank is lit and watch your fish and see if any of your fish are nipping at that leather, because that could be what's causing it. Battle OCR says, where'd you get that shirt? A guy in Australia, I believe, designed it, and it's available on Amazon. Luke says, I had a pair of clownfish in my reef tank for a few months before one of them died, and the other has lived alone for about a month. Would it be possible to add another clownfish to make a pair? Yes. What you basically want to do is find another clownfish that's half the size of the one you have now and put that in, and they will be able to work it out. If you put in same size clownfish, they may fight for who's going to be the girl. It's only been a month, but we don't know which sex your clownfish is or is about to become, so it's just smarter to get a smaller one to pair them up. Benjamin says, have you any more thoughts on getting a dog? Yeah, actually, I've been thinking about that a lot. But I haven't done anything yet, so we'll see. All right, guys, I'm going to wrap it up. It's going to be a short stream, and I hope that you guys have a great weekend. I do want you to test your water, just like I've been doing a lot lately. It's supposed to test your water on Saturdays, water test Saturday, and you want to make sure your protein skimmers are clean, make sure your dosers are dosing the proper amounts, that the tips of the tubing are not clogged or obstructed in any way, that your containers are filled with fluids. If they are not, you should replenish those to keep your tank healthy, to avoid any kind of disasters. And I hope that you listen to that advice and follow it. And I'll just see you guys online, and I should see you again next week, Saturday at 2 p.m. Bye.